Hello, Bio 107 students. Welcome to the Chapter 3 lecture overview. Chapter 3 is entitled The Molecules of Cells, and as always, we're going to have the learning objectives on the second slide of the presentation. Make sure, again, I strongly recommend that you get in the habit of writing down each learning, and this chapter has 4 learning objectives. Write each of those 4 learning objectives on 4 separate pieces of paper. Write them in nice big letters at the top of each sheet. And then as you're going through this lecture overview and the videos and the textbook sections, fill in the information under each learning objective so that it's nice and organized. When you take the exam, you can kind of see where these learning objectives are and you're not spending a lot of time looking through your notes for them. So let's go ahead and dive into Chapter 3. Chapter 3 to me is really a continuation of Chapter 2. If you think about what we learned about in Chapter 2, we learned that matter, everything on our planet, is made up of atoms and ions and molecules and compounds and so on. If an alien were to land on this planet and look around, they would say that Earth is a carbon-based biosphere. In other words, all the living things on this planet are really just artfully rearranged carbon. Carbon is a very important element for living things on this planet. And hinting at that is the fact that we can divide matter, or really chemicals, molecules, into 2 major categories, and that's organic and inorganic. So in order to be considered organic, the molecule must contain a carbon-hydrogen bond. Anything else is inorganic. And we tend to see these organic molecules in living things. The same patterns of these carbon-hydrogen molecules, carbon-hydrogen-based molecules, show up again and again in living organisms. And it's not to say that inorganic compounds aren't important for life. In fact, there's 2 inorganic compounds that are very important for life in water, which is of course H2O, and carbon dioxide, CO2. 2 very important inorganic molecules that are important for the life as we know it on this planet. So your job in this chapter and in this section of the lecture is to define organic and inorganic for yourself, and determine if you could recognize a molecule based on its structure or its formula, whether it's organic or inorganic. So that does it for the first section. So let's move on to the second section. And the second section, now we're going to start talking about these macromolecules. And remember that I said that these carbon-hydrogen bonds tend to show up in certain patterns in living organisms. And so the molecules that the major molecules that make up living things can be generally categorized into 4 major categories. And those are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And of course, I just threw a word out there that you probably haven't heard before, and that's macromolecule. And hopefully you know that macro means big. So we're talking about really big molecules. Just to kind of give you a frame of reference here, a sodium chloride molecule, so NaCl, table salt, right, consists of 2 atoms, right? 1 atom of sodium and 1 atom of chloride. So it's a 2-atom molecule. When we talk about macromolecules that are important for life, we're talking about thousands and thousands of atoms. An example would be an enzyme, a protein called lactase. It's an enzyme, it's actually not even that big, really. I looked it up. It has 2,000 amino acids. It's a 2,000 amino acid long protein. And each amino acid has about 20 atoms. So 20 times 2,000 would be 40,000. So lactase, again, an enzyme of not particularly big size, has 40,000 atoms in it compared to table salt, which has 2. So these are big molecules, right? We're talking about really big molecules with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of atoms in them, right? Very, very complex macromolecules. If you think about Legos, right, if you have a tiny A Lego would be like your subunit. If you have like this massive Lego city, if you've been to Legoland in where is that? Carlsbad, somewhere in North County, right? They make everything out of Legos. Those would be the macromolecule. So your job in this lecture is to define, not only define what macromolecule means, but what the units of macromolecules are. They're called monomers, and how those monomers come together to form polymers. And the type of reaction that makes those polymers are called dehydration synthesis reactions. And likewise, the type of reactions that can break those polymers down into monomers are called hydrolysis reactions. So you're going to watch this quick video and read section 3.3 of your text to define what a hydrolysis reaction is and what a dehydration synthesis reaction is and what the differences are between them. And a major difference between them, make sure I'm getting all my notes. If you see me looking up here, I'm looking at my notes for the for this lecture. Okay. And a major difference between them is that in dehydration reactions, so think about building a massive Lego castle, right? We're building something up. That's going to take a lot of energy. And those types of reactions are called anabolic reactions. Anabolic means building. On the other hand, hydrolysis reactions are all about breaking things down. And when we break something down, we're going to harvest a lot of energy from that. And those types of reactions are called catabolic reactions. So this section of the lecture, your job for this section is to differentiate between these two major types of reactions, dehydration synthesis reactions and hydrolysis, determine or kind of define anabolic and catabolic in your own words, use everyday words to describe them, and see which reaction you can assign those two terms to. And then finally, characterize hydrolysis reactions and dehydration synthesis reactions in these four ways. What is the monomer that would build the polymer? What is the polymer that can get broken down into a monomer? What are the reactants and what are the products? And is energy either required to make this happen, or is energy released? All right, so the last few slides of this lecture go into the four categories. What your job, if you choose to accept it, is to categorize and characterize each of these four major types of macromolecules. So the four macromolecules, again, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins, and they all have characteristic they'll have characteristics that make them unique. For example, carbohydrates tend to have only 3 elements that make up all of these various different carbohydrates. And those are, the 3 elements are carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, when we have a very simple carbohydrate, we call that a monosaccharide. So monosaccharides are the monomers of the polymer carbohydrate. And you can see that monomer here. Right, here's two, whoops, where's my level? There you go. My 2 monomers here. So I have 2 monomers together, and they're going to come together in a dehydration synthesis reaction to form a polymer. In this case, we have the polymer that we're having is a disaccharide. It's 2 monosaccharides together. So monosaccharides and disaccharides are what we really think of as sugar, right? They're sugar molecules. So a monomer that we are familiar with is glucose. A monosaccharide that we're familiar with is glucose. A disaccharide that you're familiar with is sucrose, otherwise known as table sugar. But it's when we get to the level of the polysaccharides, many units of these monosaccharides together, that we start to see interesting patterns occur, and that's where they kind of become very interesting biological molecules. So we're all familiar with starch, pasta, bread, potatoes, and so on, right? Those are just really long chains of sugar molecules. But we also have other forms of carbohydrates that are really long that are important to us. For example, mammals like us have this long chain of carbohydrates called glycogen, and we store it in our liver, and it's a nice medium-term energy storage molecule for our body. Plants, whoa. This is just, I'm recording a video.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay, no, come on in, it's just a practice.
Okay.
Plants can build many monosaccharides together to form a polysaccharide called cellulose, and that has a structural function and gives plants their rigidity. So make note the 3 remaining slides here have the same basic structure. We talk about what the monomer is, what the polymer is, what elements make up this polysaccharide, this polymer. Some interesting examples here, glucose, sucrose, and then what the major function of this macromolecule is in living things. All right, so you're going to do this for lipids and proteins, and finally for nucleic acids as well. And as you're reading the section, like I said, as you're reading the section of the book and watching this really fantastic video from the Amoeba Sisters, I want you to see if you can recognize the monomer structure or the polymer structure. If you were to see a picture or a drawing, a simple picture, a simple drawing of these structures, would you be able to recognize it? And what would you use to recognize that drawing? And then another thing that would be really helpful for the test is for you to fill out this table that describes each of these 4 lipids in terms of what their monomer is, what their polymer is, the different examples that we gave. For example, the examples of carbohydrates were glucose, sucrose, what were they? Cellulose, and so on. What are the elements that make them up? It turns out that different elements make up the different categories, and so on. So that does it for this chapter. Just a little over 10 minutes, not too bad. I'm going to try to trim that up before I publish. And that does it. See you at the weekly review.